So what is Corticon? Corticon is software very specifically designed to manage and execute business rules. And it's intended to be used by those who understand the rules the best. Now, this last part seems like an afterthought, but it's really not. It's a very important part about business rule management systems in general, and Corticon in particular. It's not just a coding environment, because any coding environment can capture and manage and execute business rules, but the real trick here is to be able to do that by people who actually understand the rules. So that's one of the wrinkles here that we'll go into in a little bit more detail. To understand why business rules exist or why business rule management software exists, I think it's useful to look a little bit at the way we develop IT applications today, at least from the business point of view or from the non-technical point of view. Today, when IT applications are developed, we usually start the process by collecting our requirements. And this includes our business rules. We look to policies, we look to regulations, we look to subject matter experts, domain experts, whoever it is who knows what the rules are. Then we typically organize them, formalize them, and document them in some form of specification or requirement. And then, again, this is from the business point of view, magic happens. And we don't really always know what's going on inside the black box. All we know is that highly trained, highly technical, and very expensive people are very busy for a long period of time. And at some point in the future, we get an application, we get a system. And again, from the business point of view, this has its drawbacks. And primarily, these are the kinds of problems that can result from this approach. This whole thing, first of all, takes time. It takes time to build, it takes time to deploy, it takes time to test. And while that time is being used, the world goes on, right? The business changes, the market industry requirements change, the regulatory environment changes, everything changes, nothing stays the same. And so what we did up front may no longer be appropriate or relevant when we finally get our system. And then also there's an issue of visibility. If we don't know what's going on inside this black box, again, from the business point of view, we don't always trust it. We don't always understand it. And we don't always embrace it when it's finally ready for us. So with these kinds of challenges or with these kinds of problems in mind, let's look at the same process from a slightly different point of view. And that is sort of more the traditional technical point of view. And if you're talking to a technical audience, virtually every IT person at some point in their career has seen this type of chart. You've probably seen it too, where time is being measured along the horizontal scale here. And we've got our time sort of divided up into the typical phases of development, all the way from requirements on the left, all the way to deployment and production on the right. And on the vertical scale here, we have a measure of how expensive it is to fix problems. And the point of this chart here is that there are different people involved along the way. So in the early stages of our development, we have the business people, similar to what I just showed you on the previous chart, developing requirements and understanding what the application is supposed to do. Then we have IT involvement, where we're building and testing. And then at the very end, the business becomes involved again, typically in acceptance testing, and then ultimately in using the system once it's in production. So that black box in the previous slide is kind of represented here as this orange phase of the development cycle. And so if we look at how expensive it is to fix problems over the course of time, we usually see some type of graph that looks like this, right? This is kind of accepted as gospel within the IT community, that finding problems later makes them much more expensive and difficult to fix. So our goal as IT people is to fix them and as early as possible. Well, that means that if a developer makes a mistake while she's coding, there's a phase of the cycle designed to catch that. It's called the unit testing phase. Notice that the unit testing phase is immediately after the coding phase. Oftentimes they go hand in hand, but regardless, the idea is to keep that time difference as small as possible so that problems that are introduced are detected and resolved as quickly as possible, and therefore as inexpensively as possible. So you can see the difference in cost is being shown over here on the left-hand side. So relatively short period of time, relatively small cost. Now, developers are human, right? They make mistakes, so is everybody else, including the business people who were involved in the gathering or the definition of requirements up front. Here's the problem. If mistakes are made up front, when are they discovered? Well, they're usually discovered later on when the business gets involved again during acceptance testing. Now look at the difference in time. We've gone from the very beginning almost all the way to the end, and so therefore the cost to fix those kinds of problems is much higher. And then of course the worst case scenario is where we don't discover problems until our system is in production. Maybe the customer discovers the problems for us and lets us know. And of course, those types of mistakes are the most expensive to solve. In fact, they can be so expensive to solve that they can threaten the entire business. So what this means is then that sometimes the most expensive mistakes we make in the course of developing a new IT application are those that were made during the requirements phase, or the ones that were sort of cooked into the requirements from the very beginning. So when we talk about business rules, right, business rules are more than just a new way of coding logic, right? The IT world doesn't really need any new ways of coding logic. There are plenty of tools out there, plenty of languages and platforms. The point of business rules management systems and the point of Corticon is to shift this curve down to the left as far as possible, and give people a way of finding these problems in the requirements as early as possible. And the way we do that is by giving these people, who typically are less technical or non-technical people, we do this by giving them a very special set of tools. You know, the business people today really have a lousy set of tools. They have Excel, they have Word, they have Visio, they have all these, you know, office type tools to let them do their daily work. What they don't have is a way of creating rules that go immediately into implementation, and they also don't have a way of making sure that those rules are correct, that they've got their rules right. And that's the big point of Corticon, is putting tools in the hands of a very specific user group, you know, less technical people, lets them build their rules that go directly into implementation, so there's no translation, there's no game of telephone being done with the IT people, and also gives them all the tools they need to make sure that those rules are right, so they can be used directly in an IT application, as opposed to just being used as source for somebody else to translate.